Hey, what's up? Happy New Year, guys. I'm here to talk to y'all about my top 5 fighters who are going to have a great 2021. And this list is in no particular order, so this is just names that came to mind whenever I was thinking of who I'm ready to see, who I'm excited to see in 2021, and these are the names that I came up with. So with Fight Island happening, it kind of brought back sports, which we were all ready to see, but it was also kind of a interesting story to follow whenever everything else was kind of shut down, slowing down, or not happening at all. And it was very interesting for me to see Dana White kind of put this thing together piece by piece of something that really hasn't been done before, especially not in the climate that it was during a global pandemic. And the UFC has documentaries about this and stuff like that, I'm sure. But the thing was, Dana White getting a place to do this at, making sure everybody was tested, making sure everything was clean, everything was set to go. Then the hardest part was getting fighters to come do this and overcoming the obstacles of main events getting canceled, people testing positive, quarantining fighters so that they don't get infected later on. Overall, I think they showed the will and determination of the fighters who really did want to fight. Alright, so to get us started on this list, we're going to start with Yuri Prohaska. So he's 28 years old, he fights at light heavyweight. He said the main purpose he was coming for the UFC was to fight Jon Jones. And he actually got an offer to come to the UFC a couple years ago, but he told his agent, he told the UFC he wasn't ready. He still needed to develop a little bit more. So he fought in Ryzen, and he did really well for himself. He got a lot of finishes, both with submissions and knockouts. So this dude made a big impact on UFC 251 prelims whenever he fought Uzumir. And so when he first started coming out, I didn't know anything about him. I had no idea who he was. He was just another light heavyweight. And when we saw him fight, I thought it was very unorthodox. Whenever he was fighting Uzumir, there's a lot of times where he got caught unnecessarily. It seemed like even when he got caught, he was comfortable. He kind of reminds me of like a Tony Ferguson type of light heavyweight fighter, but being at light heavyweight, you can't make those mistakes. Those guys put people out quick. They shut lights off. But he made a big impact the way he was moving. He actually finished Uzumir in a very decisive fashion. He finished Uzumir in the second round. I think that once he gets into his rhythm, it's very hard to throw him off. The thing that makes him deadly is the volume of his strikes. And not just that he throws a lot of punches, but every one of his punches matter, it seems like. And so when he starts landing a volume of precision punches, there's really not much anyone can do about it, especially when they get that one punch that kind of leads into the next one, the next one. The next thing you know, his opponent's on the ground. In addition to his volume and his precision, you also have to watch out for his length. His length to close distance, his angles that he hits you at are very strange, very different. But it seems to me he does have that stunning power. So he's able to stun people dead in their tracks when they're coming at him, and he quickly turns their offense into defense. So I'm expecting big things from his next fight, but he does have his hands full with Dominic Reyes, but they should be fighting on February 27th. This next guy on the list is another bearded fellow who also made his UFC debut this year, and that's Khamzat Chimaev. And this dude definitely made an impact as far as not only performing this year and handling his opponents as decisively as he did, but also just kicking in the door with making an impact. His interviews were golden. His beef on Twitter with Conor and stuff were great. And, he really set himself up to have a big year in 2021. So he's 26 years old and he's actively fighting in 2 different weight classes, middleweight and welterweight. So he makes his UFC debut on July 15th and he submits his opponent in the second round. Then 10 days later in a different weight class, he knocks out his opponent in the first round. Then a couple months later in September, he ends up one-shotting his opponent in 17 seconds into the first round. So that's 3 performance of the night bonuses right then and there. And he just debuted in July, like I said. So this dude's making big impacts, kicking in the door, making sure his name's known and heard. So he was set to fight Leon Edwards later this month on the 20th, but it got canceled, unfortunately, due to COVID. And so now Khamzat's trying to get back on track, trying to get to his next fight, which would have been a big fight for him to have against Leon Edwards, especially if he would have won, obviously. Someone who was ranked, someone who's been on an 8-fight win streak. And to win against someone like Leon Edwards would have definitely put some respect behind the hype that's been given around Chimaev so early on in his career. Leon said he'd be more than willing to take that fight later on in time as soon as Khamzat's at 100% and fully recovered. But for now, I'm sure Leon's going to be focusing on another fight because he wasn't able to fight at all in 2020. So maybe we'll see that one later down the year. But once Chimaev's back to 100%, I'm eager to see what he's going to do this year, whether it's a rescheduled fight with Leon or somebody else at a different weight class, but I'm excited to see what he's bringing to the table. All right, next up on the list is one of my favorite fighters on the UFC roster right now, and probably one of my favorite fighters of all time, and that's Amanda Nunes. So the Lioness, the double champ, the champ, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, so she's the champ of the women's featherweight and bantamweight titles. We've seen her defend her title once earlier this year in June against Felicia Spencer. The only question left for Amanda Nunes is what's next. You know, she ended Ronda Rousey's reign in the UFC. She knocked out Holly Holm via head kick. She beat Chris Cyborg whenever everybody thought that was going to be her biggest challenge, and she decisively beat her. And she's successfully defended both of her titles. So the only thing that makes sense to me is a trilogy fight with her rival Valentina Shevchenko. So they've already fought twice, and both of those fights went down to a decision win by Amanda Nunes. And Valentina Shevchenko is the women's flyweight champion, and she defended her belt, I think, twice in 2020. So she would go up to bantamweight. She would try to take this belt from Amanda Nunes, and we'll see who leaves out there double champ. So the next fighter on my list is one of my favorite fighters to watch, and he is Israel Stylebender Adesanya. So Israel Adesanya won his middleweight championship against Robert Whittaker back in 2019 and defended it twice in 2020. Once against Yoel Romero, we all know how that went, and then again against Paulo Costa, and we all know how that went as well. So before we got into 2021, Israel Adesanya actually made the move from middleweight to light heavyweight, and I think he made that move simply just to troll Jon Jones. I mean, he's obviously had a lot of success at the middleweight division. He's moving up to light heavyweight to fight Jan Blachowicz, who recently won Jon Jones' vacated light heavyweight title against Dominic Reyes. So Israel Adesanya cuts to the front of the line, takes on Jan Blachowicz for the light heavyweight title. So what makes it so interesting is that it proposes a lot of questions to us. So Israel Adesanya goes up, fights Jan Blachowicz, and we saw what Jan Blachowicz did to Dominic Reyes. Broke his nose into that fight. Way before his nose was broken, he was tearing up his body with the kicks. You know, it was just a brutal fight to watch. So we got to see how Israel Adesanya is going to handle fighting at light heavyweight. And if Izzy wins, you know, Jon Jones is up at heavyweight. We all know Israel Adesanya went to light heavyweight to get Jon Jones' attention. So will Jon Jones come back down to light heavyweight to regain his throne? Will Israel Adesanya continue to defend the middleweight belt? And we know Robert Whittaker is going to try to make some moves to get back to that championship. So it opens up a lot of doors. There's a lot of different possibilities. I think it made a big impact, a big splash automatically as soon as he made the move. If he wins at light heavyweight, if he wins that title, Jon Jones is going to come back. He's going to come back down to fight Israel Adesanya, I believe. You know, it's a fight that we don't get many opportunities to see fights like this, and I think we need to take advantage of it, especially after all the main events and stuff that we missed in 2020. So Stylebender had a great 2020. You know, he took out Paulo Costa, made up for that fight that he had with Yoel Romero, which was kind of a snooze fest, and decisively beat Paulo Costa after leading up to all the hype. And, you know, he's too skinny. He doesn't have knockout power. And we saw what happened. You know, we saw how he dominated that fight, just technically picking him apart slowly but surely. And Adesanya gave us a lot of funny moments in 2020 as well, you know, with the social distancing before it was cool with Yoel Romero, and the dry humping with the humping of Paulo Costa and the boob thing going on in the last fight as well. But it's going to be interesting to see Israel Adesanya fight at light heavyweight, not having to go through such a tremendous weight cut, and see how he handles himself, see how he deals with Blachowicz's Polish power. So, you know, I'm really eager to see that fight. Hopefully it happens on March 7th, and it's really hard to pick against Adesanya, so we'll see how it turns out. All right, so next fighter on the list is someone who had a very interesting 2020, and that's Kevin Trailblazer Holland, or Kevin Big Mouth Holland, as Dana White likes to call him, because this dude just doesn't shut up. So he fought 5 times this year. So he tied the record for having the most fights in a year. 3 out of the 5 became performance of the night victories, and he was just on a tear throughout this entire year. And his most recent fight was phenomenal. I mean, you know, we saw him in a bad position, and he obviously turned into a very great one and knocked him out unexpectedly. He's definitely a noticeable personality. Like Dana White said, like a lot of folks have noticed, he talks a lot. You know, he puts himself in good positions. And it's funny because Dana has told this story where he didn't want to sign him. He didn't want his personality of that big mouth, always talking, always had something to say. And he actually fought on Dana White's Contender Series and won, but Dana said no. But in 2018, Thiago Santos' opponent fell through, and so everybody else that they called from the Contender Series didn't want to take the fight against Thiago Santos, and so they called up Kevin Holland, and he was more than happy to. And even though he lost that fight, he was able to make a big impact. You know, he's talked about possibly fighting Khamzat Chimaev. He's wanted to fight Israel Adesanya. You know, he's making moves for himself. He knocked out Joaquin Buckley, who had the knockout of the year, you know, with a spinning kick and whatnot. And even when we saw him in that fight against Souza, even though he was in a bad position on the bottom, he was able to turn it around into a very good position and an unexpected knockout victory by just taking strikes off his back and being able to knock out Sosa. So, you know, he's a very exciting fighter to watch. He definitely has a lot more to develop, and I think whenever it comes out to going against championship level fighters, I'm really looking forward into seeing how he handles tougher opponents. As far as right now, I don't think he has a fight set up yet, but as soon as it comes out, I'm sure it's going to be on a main card. He went from contender series to prelims to now the main card. So yeah, his last fight was in December, so I'm sure it'll be about a month or two until we see him again, but I'm sure he's going to want to keep that same activity. You know, he has a Cowboy Cerrone type of consistently fighting, constantly fighting, you know, staying in the rhythm. And some guys, it's easier to do that. Other times, it's not so easy. So some guys like to fight consistently so they don't have to get back into the rhythm. You know, they're already kind of in shape. They just got to focus on some things, polish up a couple things here and there, and adjust to their next opponent. Other guys like to take some time in between, recover a bit, spend time with their families, and then get back mentally and physically ready. So yeah, definitely looking forward into seeing what Kevin Holland brings into 2021. But yeah, other than that, guys, here's a few other fighters who I think are going to have a great 2021, and some names that you should look out for, and some names that you should expect to see some big moves from. So there you have it, your honorable mentions. So other than that, guys, I look forward to going into this new year with y'all. I appreciate all the love and support that I've been getting lately. I know 2020 was a rough year, hoping for a better 2021. Finally came up for a name for this page, and it's called Combat Contact. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Follow me on my gamer tag and Twitter. If you haven't already yet, be sure to follow some of these pages. They're some of my friends that are making great content.
It's just different.
Thank you. Stay blessed, stay safe. Catch you in the next video.